International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor would not be drawn to comment on whether Russian President Vladimir Putin would be arrested should he attend the upcoming BRICS summit in South Africa. She spoke to the media on the sidelines of the BRICS meeting of Foreign Affairs and International Relations Ministers underway in Cape Town now. The meeting is in preparation for the summit set for August. A warrant of arrest has been issued against Putin for the war in Ukraine as a signatory to the Rome Statute. South Africa has an obligation to act on the warrant of arrest. Dr. Greg Mills, director of the Brenthurst Foundation and leading expert on African affairs, now joins us to unpack this meeting. Thank you so much for your time here this afternoon, Dr. Mills. So, South Africa's stance on the arrest warrant issued out against President Putin has clearly overshadowed this meeting amongst, the ministers ahead of the summit in August. We're now hearing of a possibility that the meeting being moved to another country or being held virtually. How should South Africa be addressing this?
Well, it's almost inevitable that this was going to happen, given that South Africa is both a signatory to the Rome Statute, but also that there's a great deal of support among the South African public for Ukraine. The most recent opinion poll that we conducted has support for Ukraine at over 75% of the population. So if Putin does arrive in South Africa, there's going to be a great deal of civil society pressure and a great deal of political pressure domestically on the South African government, not just through the ICC. And this is something that the South Africans are clearly going to have to contemplate. But given that South Africa's foreign policy holds such store in the BRICS as the movement of preference, in terms of our position in the global south, for instance, this is obviously going to be a very difficult one for them to try and negotiate and to try and traverse. But from the perspective of many of South Africa's more important trading partners in the European Union and in the United States, of course, having Putin here is really a red flag that South Africa shouldn't accommodate.
All right, let's talk about just some of the matters that were on the agenda, one of them being the expansion of BRICS. The 5 member countries discussed the matter, which included other African and global South countries. Minister Pandor, of course, saying that she did not indicate that BRICS is not yet ready to accept new members. Just talk to us about what this would mean, particularly as we talk about, developing countries.
Well, of course, the challenge of including others in the BRICS fold is the problem itself with the BRICS, is you've got 2 very large countries in India and China, 3/8 of the world's population, for instance, and very large economies and growing all the time. A country on decline, which is Russia, its population diminishing and its economic power significantly damaged by the war in Ukraine. And then you've got the relative minnows in Brazil, much larger than South Africa, of course, but compared to, say, India and China, not in the same league as them. And then South Africa, as a country which is almost out of sync in more ways than one. It's out of sync in economic terms. It's out of sync in value terms. We have a constitution that places democracy and human rights at its center. And those are not values that one would commonly ascribe either with China or with Russia. So the problem about expansion is about the degree of differentiation between countries that you're going to be able to accommodate. What's the value base of this grouping? What's the glue that's going to tie it together? And what are you going to talk about in common terms, other than generalities about the need for more finance for development, about the need for more trade for development? How are you going to deal with thorny issues around values and human rights and democracy, which the BRICS is currently struggling with? And on top of all of this is another very big problem, which is that China sees itself, and India to a lesser extent, as powers in their own right, that they want to be, and this is stated in Chinese foreign policy, a global power by 2049 and the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic. So that puts it almost on a different trajectory with a different set of ambitions to the BRIC countries themselves. So South Africa is a little bit clinging on to the coattails of BRICS, while others really are perhaps using it more as a stepping stone as a tool within an arsenal of possibilities in their foreign policy. And that makes it quite hard to seek commonalities in this regard. And then on top of all of the on top ofs, you have the issue of the war in Ukraine, which they've been able to sort of hold the ring in terms of maintaining a common position sort of in BRICS. But it's very clear that South Africa and Brazil and India, of course, come from very different human rights backgrounds and are on very different trajectories than Russia and China in this regard.
And then, of course, I just want to talk about the fact that the Indians, Foreign Affairs Minister mentioned that, the global environment has expectations of the BRICS nations to approach contemporary issues in a way, in a new way. Just how much pressure is there, do you think, for the BRICS countries to try and find solutions, just to the existing problems that the West has, according to many people, depending on who you speak to, have failed to solve?
Well, again, they have to agree on common positions. And yes, I think it would be very helpful if the BRICS were able to develop alternative methods of financing, to be able to come up with common international positions on things like climate change, for instance, where we battle to get consensus globally, and on finding practical means to solve some of these seemingly very difficult, thorny developmental problems that the African continent in particular, as the foremost repository of the world's poor, has faced. But these issues become that much more difficult when you don't have political commonality between your peoples. China is not by any stretch of the imagination a democracy. Neither is Russia. And Russia, of course, has taken a very different foreign policy line to what certainly Brazil and India and South Africa should be comfortable with. It's hard to imagine how the BRICS can transform itself from a well-meaning acronym and a set of well-meaning intentions to something that is of great value and something that we should be placing investment of scarce resources and time in. And I think the war in Ukraine, again, has exposed the BRICS horribly, which is why you're seeing more attention now played by South Africa on peacemaking, more attention now played by China on peacemaking. But these peacemaking endeavors have to be knitted together with the very powers that the BRICS seems to rival,
Dr. Mills, let's
which
leave
is
it
the
there
West
for now.
and the United States.
All right, Dr. Mills, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Dr. Mills is the director of Brenthurst Foundation there and a leading expert on African affairs.